Hi guys, Mr. Sonneberg here. Today what we're going to be talking about are high productivity issues. So this is related to artificial fertilizers and what they have done and some of the issues related to them both could be both positive, both negative as well. So this is for Science 9 students studying environmental chemistry. It's going to be topic 1 in your textbook. Again, this would be a good time to get a sheet of paper out and a pen or pencil and jot down some notes for your own study purposes. So artificial fertilizers. So for example, the fertilizers that we were using in our lab in class, we looked at the nitrogen levels, phosphate levels, and then the potash or potassium levels in the fertilizers, and we are monitoring basically what those numbers mean in terms of growth and such. But what has happened since the early 1900s, when these artificial fertilizers were then produced, is uh, until then, plants that you would go through, they'd receive their nitrates exclusively from nature. So through this process of the nitrogen cycle, there would be bacteria, soil bacteria that would be doing nitrogen fixation on nitrogen from the atmosphere, and they'd convert it into nitrates in the soil, and then plants could use those forms of nitrates as well. But so this natural cycle, the nitrogen cycle, until the early 1900s, that was the only way that plants obtained these nitrates as a form of as a form of natural fertilizer. But then what happened was this artificial production came to be, and then we had these fertilizers. And so what happened was um, these nitrogens levels from these fertilizers, well, it's increasing the nitrogen level available to plants in the soil. So uh, basically what happened in that time was it increased the amount of nitrogen in the environment by as much as 140 million tons per year. So now we're looking at, with artificial fertilizers, we had these natural processes that were working prior to the prior to the early 1900s, where nature, just by nature, they produced the nitrogen, these producers, these plants. But now what's happening is we're using artificial fertilizers and we're increasing the amount of nitrogen available to plants, which, what do we think is going to happen? It's going to increase growth. So what does this mean though? Okay, we're using artificial fertilizers to increase production. Well, what's happening is we are increasing the production and we're increasing plant growth. So then, because our plants are growing maybe taller and such, and we're yielding larger crops, well, what happened was the production of crops doubled worldwide due to these artificial fertilizers. Okay, so we actually doubled the amount. Just take a look here. I just got that from right here, but we double it worldwide. So with an increase of crop, then what we're going to see is an increase in food production, and that's great, right? So if we're increasing the crops and we can double worldwide the crops that we yield, this is a great thing, right? We have more food. But is it great? Because there's always a cost that occurs. So now we're increasing worldwide, but we're also increasing the food production, which is good because we've got countries, people starving, and such like that. But now, what are some of the issues that are correlating to this increased production? Well, here's a few problems. I've got 3 problems we're going to talk about. One, to use these fertilizers, we have to mix them in a it takes a lot of water to ensure that the fertilizers are working. So we're using up a lot of water, and then these fertilizers, in order to have them, they're very expensive. So that's the first issue that we see, is the expense right here. They're very expensive to use these fertilizers. The second thing is monoculture. Now, that's basically if we just plant one type of crop. Now what we're doing is we're limiting its ability to fight off disease. So if I plant one crop over and over, and then what happens is a disease comes in, then what's going to happen is I'm not going to have the variability or the variation to survive that particular disease, and what it's going to do is it's going to wipe out the entire crop. So what we want to do is we get so reliant on, sometimes they'll underseed, and we'll have mixed crops just to ensure that excuse me, we can either create nitrogen rich soil, or we can ensure that this monoculture doesn't occur, so that we don't have disease wiping out our whole plant. So if you take a look at what I'm talking about right down here, we have we have diverse potatoes and we have cloned potatoes. Now the cloned potatoes, notice that they're all the same right here. Okay, they're all the same. Whereas these diverse potatoes, well, diverse being there's different types of potatoes. Now, if I have a potato with blight, which is the black, which is diseased, right? Well, then I look here, I have two, I'm still left with potatoes in the end. But if I only have one type of cloned potato and blight runs through and it affects all the potatoes, now how many I have left? Zero. So this is that monoculture. We only have mono being one, so we only have one type of particular crop. If disease hits, now I'm left with nothing. At least if I have diverse crops or diverse potatoes or multiple crops, then if a disease hits, there's still some left over to yield a crop, right? So that's another one of the problems is this monoculture. And the last thing is chemical agents used to protect the crop. So we're using things such as herbicides and we're using pesticides, and those are affecting other species. And so uh, they're reducing the amount of damage to the crops, but at the same time they're costly, and there's costly and harmful effects in the environment, right? So animals that consume these pesticides and herbicides, then it accumulates, and through bioaccumulation, then it's uh, passed on to the next species, and we see that biomagnification where now it's actually going throughout a whole food web and food chain, and it's actually affecting numerous amounts of species and a variety of species because we've introduced it. So one, it's protecting the crops, so at the same time it's very harmful to the environment as it's passed from species to species through a food chain and a food web. Anyways, so this is high production. So basically we're increasing the rate of production of crops and food crops, but it has a price. It's expensive, and people are getting into monoculture trying to produce so much, and they're not disease resistant because there's not enough variation. And then we're introducing pesticides and chemical substances, pesticides and herbicides that are affecting the environment. So there's the pros of using artificial fertilizers, and there's also the cons of using artificial fertilizers. And so I hope we understand the difference between the two, and we'll actually look a little bit more in class about these types of fertilizers. Anyways, that concludes my screencast, guys. Hopefully this has helped, and we'll see you on the next screencast. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Bye.